So have you gathered, Yo's given me the impossible job of summarizing everything in 30 minutes. She's also vindictively sent me 3 pages of detailed notes 5 minutes ago, which is now she's expecting me to assimilate and to present in a coherent fashion. And my way out of this is to not present them in a coherent fashion, and we'll see how we get on. So do you want to, you could put up slides up perhaps, Yo. So because I'm going to just take them in order and see what I've got out of this. I'm also going to refer to points that came out of the videos, which people I hope have seen but may have forgotten, because there are a number of really, really good points that were made there, and I'm going to try and tie those into the discussion. So the first one then is on respect and promote autonomy. Here we are, I should do the screen sharing. Okay, we'll get there in a second. And Yo says that this is the #1 priority. And I think everyone is clearly agreed that autonomy is a preferred term to independence, because independence is something that can be abused. It can be used as a way of restricting resource allocation, etc. So autonomy is quite different. Gillian Looms-Quinn in her video made the point that, you know, if you do not need support, then the life you want is within your own grasp. If you do need support, then it's a struggle. And if particularly you'll be stigmatized if you lack spoken language. Even if you do have spoken language, and in her case, the difficulty of interacting with someone can render you incapable of expressing your needs, such that you tend to agree with what the person you're speaking to wants rather than what you want to explain to them. And I think this was clear also from Vanessa Bob's intervention, where she made the problem that her son has now at the age of 18. He's regarded as a fully functioning adult, and her views are no longer wanted or respected by care providers. And this is incredibly difficult for him because he's still a boy. And I think people agreed that there is a problem here. Schools are important in this because education extends to 25, but autonomy needs to be supported to allow people to make their own decisions. And it's clearly a complex concept. Some of the comments coming through from the workshops I didn't attend, I'll just read these really, because they all bear on the point. No one is really independent. Some autistic people don't have enough people in their support network for their well-being, so we need interdependence. So people need to be helped to have meaningful connections. Many people do things for themselves. Sorry, making people do things for themselves is often about the provider having measurable outcomes. And I think I came across that in another context, that provision is often outcome driven rather than by the measurable outcomes, rather than by addressing the real needs of the autistic person. Someone commented that you wouldn't make someone with physical disabilities crawl across the floor to show their independence. So permanent lifelong disabilities mean permanent lifelong support needs. Building self-advocacy skills and decision-making skills needs to start in schools, and supporting parents to cope with and support the development of autonomy and risk-taking. So that goes back to the point that Vanessa made, I think, that really this is something that is very, very important. It's all very well giving someone autonomy, but not if they're incapable of expressing their needs. Autonomy in healthcare and in research, people really appreciate a GP who respected their right to make decisions about their own healthcare. And making people constantly try to do things they struggle with can be very detrimental to self-confidence. And again, we come back to this deficit-based model, which I'll refer to in connection with one of the other priorities. We talked a little bit about accrediting services, perhaps setting a quality standards on training content. And also Trevor Wright mentioned support needed for autistic trainers who may be able to be much more effective in communicating with fellow autistic people. So I'm going to move on to number 2 on support communication effectively throughout the lifespan. A couple of comments here came through that the role of arts in communication and expression. and a wholehearted plea here that to undermine the assumption that there is a whole swathe of the community who can't be heard from, essentially can't be communicated with. Sarah made the comment, this is the absolute basics of care. Lorcan needed to allow communication in the fashion needed, wanted, not to teach communication or teach alternatives, that people should not be an educator in communication, but a partner in communication. Again, it's allowing that flow to come from the autistic person. Providing information technology, which is very helpful in the right context, of course, is limited by resources. And there are some settings that have very poor IT provision, for example, internet access in residential care. So there's clearly a money issue here, which is detrimental to the ability to harness modern technology to help communication. Martijn made the point that there seems to be little awareness that small changes in communication style can be really, really helpful. It's not all about the technology itself. So let's see what else I've got here. It's important to ensure the availability of communication partners, someone to talk to, and meaningful things to do, because otherwise you don't have anything to talk about. I think this is particularly important for children who won't see the need for communication if there's nothing in it for them. Speech and language therapists are much too scarce. To do alternative communication well is extremely expensive. So that's reiterating the point I made. The autism strategy funding is derisory, and there is no point in training a child and one worker. All staff working with them need to be training and supported. And getting across to the staff team, some staff don't seem to engage people in communication. There needs to be a lot more training and support for staff to build on communication skills. So again, training is going to come up again and again and again. So let me move on to number 3, which is providing care which is autistic person-centered. Well, we have quite a discussion about whether person-centered is the right phrase, and there seems to be some idea that we need a better definition of what person-centered means, so there's consistency in approach. If people don't understand the same thing, then people will approach it in different ways. Sarah made the point that it could be pejorative, and what we need perhaps is a more relational approach. So person-led is certainly better than person-centered, and maybe relationship-centered is an even better term, something I think to mull over. What it means, though, is not making assumptions about what independence and autonomy look like to be autistic. You have to separate out what an autistic needs are from what other people feel is best for them, and not expecting autistic people to fit in with preconceived ideas, or particularly in social situations. Liz Howard, her video, said that social workers provide support in independence and decision-making, and should understand the needs of autistic people, and there should be no assumptions, no stereotypical definitions of what autism is, because we know that social care, being grossly underfunded, will struggle to meet those audible aims. Let me move to number 4. Okay, tackling environmental and other stresses, a huge topic. In Jo Minchin's video, she described various types of stress and how stress can look like a mental health problem for the individual, and can certainly become one. She looked at things like the physical environment, such as accommodation that people have to accept, but also things like transitions, and particularly for young people around puberty. And of course, there are the sensory issues that need tackling. And there is poor provision of that, poor understanding, and a poor understanding of how painful and distressing this is, and how it can lead to distress behavior, which then leads to all the other problems that we are horribly aware of. Also, there needs to be a greater recognition that autistic people have very diverse sensory problems. There's not a standard set, and people have both internal and external worlds that they have to deal with. Joe made the point that even new premises may not necessarily be built in an autism-friendly way. Again, there's this lack of understanding that that Tim raised, and the adjustments need not be very expensive. What would needed is more realistic expectations for guiding service providers. There are so many simple things that can be done that don't necessarily involve huge expense. Jill made from the Tizard Center mentioned that the recognition of sensory needs is just not good enough, particularly for patients, or sorry, not patients, particularly, I can't read my own writing, people with communication difficulties. And it's hard to communicate sensory needs. People have to find ways in which they improve their knowledge of the person. Let me see what else came through on recommendation 4. Staff approach and predictability, listening to people. People may not know their sensory needs and be able to explain them. So we come back to the same point again, but we need to listen to people. External expertise from an autistic person who understands sensory needs, who can help make sense of, lost my page. I told you this would be incoherent. Okay. I don't know what's happened here. I've lost something from your notes, Yo.
I think that point was about the benefit if an autistic person is less able to communicate their sensory needs or even identify them, the benefits of having external experts who are autistic themselves who can help to articulate those needs to people working with them.
I just lost the end of the sentence, so okay. A comment here about, no, this is on recommendation 6. I have lost your notes. No, wait a minute, I've got them now. Okay, the importance of believing people about their sensory experiences. If staff were told that a diabetic person needed an insulin injection, they wouldn't say, no, they don't, or I can't do that for them. I'll have to do that for everyone else. It's quite a nice point. Something to avoid is saying the world is full of sensory stimuli and autistic people just need to get used to it. We would not say that about other disabilities. It's patronizing. Autistic people must have access to a safe environment to recover from sensory overload. Sensory overload impairs function and causes distress, and people have the right to retreat from that source of distress. This is such an important issue. I think it really has to be high up on the list. Okay, let me turn to number 5, which is removing barriers to access. Mary Doherty made some interesting points in her video about the forms of access. Phones, it can be physical things like using the phone or making an appointment, which is a very effective barrier to healthcare, but it also can be about interacting and communication or struggling with the physical environment in which an autistic person might find themselves. It's also about the loss of executive function, which makes organization and planning very difficult. So if an appointment gets cancelled, then you forget to rebook it. However, she stresses there are simple things that can be done: understanding and training, awareness of the barriers, reasonable adjustments. And the last point, though, she made is interesting, is to change the culture. And she herself, being autistic, made the point that autistic healthcare providers do not disclose their condition, let's call it that. And that we had some discussion about that in the session I attended, that the difficulty that people face if they do reveal the fact that they are autistic. It would be so helpful if healthcare professionals who are autistic are able to openly discuss that. And that would be enormously helpful then for the autistic people who are seeking healthcare. So someone has suggested that the NAT guide should be turned into a moderation standard that services could apply for. And that obviously we'll have to leave that with NAT. The reply is that NAT doesn't have the resources to do that alone, but is open to discussion of possible partnerships to do that. We had a discussion about risk. one of the problems for reasonable adjustments from organizations is, firstly, they don't really understand what reasonable adjustments can be done that are fairly straightforward. And we've come across the issue of risk averseness. And the mindset is for risk management. And this obviously prevents change because they're concerned that by removing barriers to access, removing barriers, then people will be put at greater risk. And the final issue, which prevents reasonable adjustments, is people's confidence that they already know all about autism because they've done some autism awareness training, and therefore there is no need. These reasonable adjustments, according to Charlene, maybe we need to change the term and call them something like person-led adjustments. And reasonable doesn't really tell you very much. Person-led tells you very clearly where the need and where the necessity comes from. Okay, number 6, please. Fighting stigma and discrimination. Well, again, this issue of disclosure in the workplace came up here as well. It can be difficult. When people who are autistic disclose their autism in the workplace, then the immediate question can be, what can't they do rather than what can they do? There's an issue here around multi-factor discrimination, autistic and BAME individuals, and a suggestion that NAT should engage with BAME organization, that advocacy needs to be independent so that people can make complaints without fear of discrimination, and that families have important information to add and they need a platform to contribute. And this came up in the previous setting about young autistic adults who are now regarded as independent individuals in the legal sense, are still really need huge for family support to make their needs known. We had some discussion about the strengths of autism as a means of combating stigma and discrimination. There's a concern that seeing autistic people in work in professional organizations does not necessarily transmit to autistic people with severe learning difficulties, for example. However, there's a voice that this can translate across different segments, and that we need the autistic voice regardless of the role of what they're doing. And if that autistic voice is coming from people who are in professional situations, then that's no bad thing. Defining strengths from Sue Fletcher. Watson needs to be defined in a person-led way, not in a capitalist definition, by which she means that a person's strength should not be judged by how much they can earn and how much they can contribute in income tax. So we need to get away from that. It should be person-led. Strength can also be seen even from diversity itself. The very diversity of autistic perceptions is a strength, although we need to fight back against the kind of Rain Man definition of what an autistic strength is. Not everyone can do sums really, really well. And there may be a role, particularly amongst young people, of those who have autistic parents in helping them through this. People just need to be treated humanely. And the last point about strengths is that recognition of strengths and promotion of autistic strengths should not be allowed to be used to divert away from support needs. Right, more on this. I think I've got most of that. Ensure contracts when commissioning services require equality and not exclusion, i.e. autistic children are within the mandate of CAMHS. Ensuring that service commissioners of funding are actually listening to autistic people in a non-tokenistic way to review their services, particularly autistic people who are connected to the wider autistic community. I think otherwise I've got all the points there. So let's go to 7. I think it would be hard to listen to Thomas Clayton's video without getting tearful. His stories of restraint in hospital settings were really shocking. He was humiliated, he was treated cruelly. And what was even sadder is he accepted that as normal at the time. Now, admittedly, this might be some time ago, and he was generous enough to say that he'd sometimes met people who helped him a lot, who found him ways of not getting overwhelmed, helping him keep calm and avoiding meltdowns and calling the police and being restrained. One of the points he made, which doesn't seem to come up, is the although we're talking here about recognizing behavior as distress, that the way that was managed was not only by physical interactions or physical interventions from staff, but also through medication, some of which was inappropriate. And this caused additional stress for Thomas by creating within him mental symptoms which are entirely due to the adverse effects of the drugs, which are inappropriate. Staff were not sympathetic to his attempts to describe his effects as due to the drugs, and it was only when his medication was changed, for reasons that are not clear, that these symptoms then cleared up. So this is a very difficult area. As someone said, this is everything. This is fundamental. Recognizing the impact of stressed caregivers transactionally affecting people. Seeing the need for professionals to step down from the pathologizing language and recognizing that challenging behavior has become pathologizing in itself. We need to move away from the idea of the person being the problem. As soon as people focus on behavior, we miss the person. And that's very similar to a comment in the session I addressed, well, coming from Fiona, that by focusing on the behaviors, you lose empathy with the person. It's exactly the same thing. So we need to ensure there are autistic people in the professional team to help understand what is going on for an autistic person who is less able to advocate for themselves, especially to help identify the whispers before the shouting happens. That's such a good expression. Okay, on to number 8, please, from Christine Lenihan. She's one of the few people, I think, to make the point about the impact of resource limitation. And she made the interesting statement that we move now from preventative care into crisis mode because of the lack of resources to support people at earlier stages of having problems. So people agreed with this. Finance is squeezed. We've moved from specific autism intervention to more general mode or more crisis intervention, and we're in danger of resource rationing. Tim made a point about EHC plans and the pressure on children's services, or educational services rather, the difficulty that it is to get an EHC plan because, of course, of the financial implications of providing those for children in education. Right. On comments coming from the workshops, thinking about intersection between care for autistic people and support for the elderly. What happens when autistic people need to go into care homes? The autistic needs become invisible and they just become an elderly person. There's not a great understanding and a real need. Mishandled transitions for autistic people cause distress and precipitate crises. So this transition to becoming an old person and going into care home is another one that needs to be added to the list, although it clearly doesn't get mentioned as much as the other obvious ones like school transitions or school to work, for example. For us autistic elders, there is currently just about nothing in place, almost no research, plans, accommodations, strategies, and funding, etc. The lack of ongoing specialist social training, the lack of ongoing specialist social work support, as having a named social worker, has disappeared and episodic care has come in. And this has really led to a deterioration in the planning and continuation for individuals. Okay, number 9. Ensure ongoing practical autism-specific staff training. Training, always a favorite issue. Rachel Moody said, it was asked, do staff in health and social care services have knowledge and skills to empathize with autistic people? No, she said. It's the luck of the draw. And often it's more about natural ability than the effectiveness of the training. Everyone says it needs more than awareness training. Awareness training is autism facts. And it inevitably leads to autism being regarded as a deficit condition. So the deficit-based knowledge of autism, rather than an attempt to bridge the communication gap. And she made a very interesting point that people need to try much harder because autistic people are already doing their hardest in very difficult circumstances. And either staff are not aware or they don't care. So we come back to this point that autism training needs to be autistic-led and designed. Charlene Tate had to be restrained. I use the word inadvisedly here. She wanted to rethink, she decided that we need to rethink the whole approach in both education and social care settings. There's too much emphasis on what autism is, which reiterates the point made by others, and not about how training is used as a communication tool with autistic people. So now the other points made, the worker needs to be more the focus of training, not just training about autism, but training on how to be a good support worker and how to manage their own stress. It needs follow-up training, communities of practice, regular supervision to embed training. Just training is not enough. It's how that is implemented and supported in practice. The best way to train people is to have ongoing support from a colleague who really gets it, such as an autistic colleague. But many autistic professionals feel unable to disclose because of the extent of the stigma, exactly the point that was raised earlier. It also helps for practitioners to spend time with a range of autistic people. That's a good idea, to recognize that all autistic people aren't exactly identical. And the importance of training in human rights, mental capacity, safeguarding, and genuine empathy with autistic perspectives. I think Damien made the point that training lacks follow-up on impact, which is also reiterated here. So training is one thing, but finding out whether it works or not, and then adjusting to that might be a useful idea. Okay, finally, I'm on to number 10 with 5 minutes to go. Martijn Dekkers gave a video on accepting difference and support positive autistic identity. And he gave some very practical advice on what people should do. Is let go of your idea of normal, listen and believe, be pragmatic. You know, if an autistic person is not on board with what you're proposing, then there's no way it's going to work. And you have to ask who is that a problem for? Is it for the presenter or the autistic person? Don't fix things because they are autistic. Difference is not a deficit. And please, it's not always about therapy. It can also be about fun and enjoying yourself. He made a point about the need for social groups and social interactions for autistic people with other autistic people. And that the worst thing you can possibly have is a neurotypical, a non-autistic person leading a social group, which he likened to a woman's group being led by a man, which is patronizing. It's rather amusing, I thought. Autistic space is really important, and he emphasized this also in the workshop itself, with autistic people in charge, where autistic people can be themselves. 2 points here, I think, came up, one of which I might need further explaining. Autistic staff working in social care services will help in a well-rounded picture of autistic identity. I think we all know that now. And then this is a tough one. The toughest one to tackle with commissioners about presumably accepting difference and supporting positive autistic identity is their obsession with outcomes. And perhaps in 2 minutes, someone could explain to me exactly what that means and what the problem is.
think it was Charlene Tate who made the point, and she's had
Okay.
to leave slightly earlier. I heard her make it, so I'll try and explain further. I think what she was saying is that for care providers, it's difficult to sell commissioners on the value of activities that involve supporting autistic identity because there isn't a measurable outcome that they can tick a box from.
Okay, that's very clear. Thank you very much indeed. Well, that's my summary, and I don't know what it means for Nat that they had to ask a neurotypical to do the summary for the forum, but I'll accept that as a compliment of some kind. I hope that was helpful. We've got lots of notes here. There's things we can work on. Yo, do you want to say anything about outputs from this meeting?
Just to say that please bear with us, but in due course, we will hopefully publish the videos that we sent out to you in advance of this forum on the NAT website. We will also be making available the recordings of the plenary presentations from this morning and this summary, and hopefully a written summary of the outputs from the forum as well. It might take a little while for us to get those up on the NAT website, but we will do that and try and send an email around everyone with some links when we have managed that.
Very good. Well, I think I'll hand over to you then, Yo, since we are now out of time and I'm out of breath and to finish up.
Thank you very much. So thank you very much to Ian for doing a marvelous job of processing and synthesizing and putting forward a range of comments from the workshops at a speed that autistic processing might have found a little bit challenging. So thank you very much for that. Thank you also to everybody who has come and participated in this forum. Please do distribute the NAT guide everywhere that you can, because we would really like to see it influencing commissioning practice and having an impact on the whole approach to care and support for autistic people at all ages and right across the spectrum. So thank you to everyone for coming and for everyone who's helped make the forum a success. Thank you very much, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.